This is the village of Bel Ain in the West Bank. I'm Nicholas Kristof from the New York Times, and this is a weekly test of the principle of nonviolent resistance and trying to use it to affect Israeli policy here.
Demonstrations like this against the Israeli barrier take place every Friday, with the participation of Palestinians and foreign and Israeli peace activists. They're a glimpse of something that could be a game changer in the Middle East, the possibility that Palestinians will borrow from Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and apply methods of civil disobedience on a massive scale. There's growing interest among Palestinians in these methods, but they're not there yet.
1, 2, 3, 4! 1, 2, 3, 4! Occupation no more! Occupation no more! 5, 6, 7, 8! 5, 6, 7, 8! Israel is fascist state! Israel is fascist state!
Demonstrators marched close to the barrier, and some started throwing stones. That's one of the challenges. These demonstrations are nonviolent in theory, but not in practice. Shortly afterward, Israeli soldiers fired tear gas and charged in our direction.
Too often, this is how these confrontations end, with stones from the one side and tear gas or rubber bullets from the other.
The interest in nonviolent demonstrations arises partly because one of the few Palestinian successes came from this strategy in the village of Budrus. Ayad Morar planned the campaign, and he's a leader of the nonviolent movement in the West Bank. His demonstrations flummoxed the Israeli security forces and forced them to reroute the barrier. The success of Budrus is chronicled in a terrific new documentary, Budrus.
I think it needs a high level of trust between you as a coordinator and the people, because without the trust, you cannot force anybody to follow you or to be with you.
Most West Bank demonstrations are overwhelmingly male, but the Budrus demonstration succeeded partly because they gave a major role to Palestinian women. Israeli forces found it much harder to deal with peaceful women than with stone-throwing men.
The message of Budrus is that individuals have a way to change their realities, that using strategic nonviolent resistance, there is a way to create concrete changes on the ground.
Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, a prominent Palestinian member of parliament, believes that nonviolent resistance is the best way to go.
I think that Israel is most alarmed and worried about specifically nonviolent resistance, nonviolent struggle. Why? Because I think nonviolent resistance is very effective. It's much more effective than any other forms. Second, because it exposes also the Israeli wrong propaganda about it humanizes Palestinians. The whole Israeli propaganda was based on dehumanizing and delegitimizing Palestinians.
Mr. Morar has been imprisoned for more than 6 years in Israeli prisons.
This is the bullet.
This is the bullet, yes, and I have platin connected my bones.
And he'll live with a scar in his arm for the rest of his life. But he seems devoid of bitterness and is committed to nurturing and building the nonviolent movement.
I think that this is the price of our freedom.
He understands the need to stop the rock throwing and involve more women, 2 steps that would make the movement far more effective. I don't know whether nonviolent protests will take off among Palestinians in a massive way, but it's possible, as growing numbers recognize that civil disobedience can be a far more powerful weapon than rockets and bombs. Nonviolent resistance offers a reed of hope for a future here of less violence and more change. In the West Bank, for the New York Times, I'm Nicholas Kristof.
Occupation no more! Occupation no more!